Okay, so we're back again, and we're continuing on with the conversion of our Air Hogs Titan glider into an RC trainer. So where we left off, we had glued the motor mount in, we epoxied the servo mount in, and we epoxied our two control horns onto our control surfaces. Now the one thing I forgot to do in the previous video was to cut the relief on the other side of the rudder. Okay, so just like I cut it on the elevator, so we had clearance behind. Now cut it on the side of the rudder. So what this will do is it will allow our rudder to have some clearance when it turns. Okay, so you get a nice bit of travel on it. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to attach all our control surfaces. And actually, this is the board that I mixed the epoxy on. I just like to keep this just to make sure that the epoxy dried and it didn't go just kind of gummy. Sometimes when you glue something like this and you push the epoxy down inside, you can't actually get at the epoxy to see if it's hard. So if you keep the piece that you mix the epoxy on, you can actually tell if it's nice and hard. Okay, so this came up really good. Okay, so we're gonna tape our rudder on so it's here. Now I like to actually put the tape on the same side as the control horn. Okay. Now these control horns, they slope, if you look at them, they slope forward. And what we're trying to do is to try to get the pulling position very close to the hinge line, so that way you get an equal travel in both directions when this is pivoting on the aircraft. Okay. So that's why these are sloped forward. So what I'm going to do is just I'm going to use hockey tape. Okay. Now some people use the wider packing tape. I find this stuff can tear fairly easily, and I find it also doesn't stick so well if it gets wet. So the hockey tape is quite good because it stays stuck when it's wet. It's also very tough, it won't tear, and it also works quite well in cold conditions because it's hockey tape. And I like to fly in the winter, and usually over snow. Over frozen lake is really good because there's lots of open space, and so it's cold and it gets wet, and this stuff seems to work great for that application. So we're going to stick it down on the side of the plane. Now I've pre-sanded some of these surfaces because if you look at the actual surface of the plane, it's got a lot of little imperfections in it. So if you look at the elevator here, you can see the two marks here where they've probably these were the ejectors where they pushed the part out of the mold. Look at the other side, they've got their logo on it and some date stamps, but you can also see these little cluster of small points, and these are from the vents in the mold. So when they mold these parts, they pack the mold in with small foam beads, and they're about 40% of their normal size, and there's a blowing agent inside them, and what they do is they blow steam through these vents, and it heats up all the foam beads, heats up the blowing agent, and then it expands the foam in the mold. And that's how they actually mold the parts. And then they use these two ejectors to push the part out of the mold. So there's lots of flashing around here that you can trim off. So what I did is just use some 320 grit sandpaper, and you can sand off any of the flashing. And I sanded off the edges here where the tape's going to go, just to make that nice and smooth, and to give the hockey tape a good surface to adhere to. Just make sure you wipe it off with get all the dust off it. Okay. So I tape this one on here. Now when you tape it on, you can use the back end of a hobby knife or the smooth part of your scissors, and just put some pressure on the tape because you actually want to really push the adhesive onto the surface. Okay. Make sure it's really stuck well. Okay. So now I'm just going to try to locate this rudder. So I'm going to have to make a little snip in the tape where the control horn is. Okay, just to give some clearance. Okay. Now, when you do this, you need to make sure that your rudder is off the surface of your vertical stabilizer. so it all moves freely. Okay, so I'm just going to stick it down like this. Okay, that's a little higher. That's a little higher than I normally would do, but that should be okay. So it moves nice and free. And again, just make sure you've got the adhesive stuck down really well. Just trim off any excess tape. So there's our rudder. So that's in place. Okay. Moves nice and freely. Okay, now a lot of people will tape it just to be secure. You can put a little piece of tape in the back here. Okay, so maybe I'll do that too. And what that does is it stops the tape from peeling off. You just have to make sure that you get it in so that it's not bridging the gap. Otherwise it makes it hard for the servo to overcome it. Okay, so this is a more secure way to add your tape. And you should put one on the other end here too, right? So do all ends of the tape. Now I'm going to do it for the elevator as well. Make sure you're working on the top surface of the elevator. Okay, so we're going to put our elevator here. And as you recall, the control horn is on the left for the rudder and it's on the right for the elevator. So I'll just take my tape, put it along here. Okay, now I'm going to need to make a little cut where the control horn is. I'm going to get everything centered. Okay, so I'll just cut this out. I have a problem with the tape sticking to the scissors. Okay, so I'm just going to line this up. Now you want to leave about at least a millimeter gap so that you have some room for movement here. That looks about right. Okay. And again, now I'm going to just take my scissors and I'm just going to run it along the surface. Make sure the tape is actually stuck down. Okay, so you can, I'll just do a little bit here, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but you can see the difference in how the adhesive sticks to the tape. I find if you don't do this, it just peels off fairly quickly. And again, make sure the ends of it are stuck really well. And again, it's probably a safe idea. Put a bit of tape just on the underside of the hinge, so you can just fold it back, and we'll put a piece of tape here. You just want to make sure you're not bridging the gap, or it'll make it really stiff for the servo. So it should still be nice and close to the other end. Fold it back, the tape in here, and then just press it in with your fingernail really tight into the center, into the bottom of the groove. Okay, so now our tape is on there. So there's our elevator, so we can put this now on the plane. Okay, so our plane's taking shape. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach our control horns and servo arms. So The servo arms are attached with just a single screw onto the servo. Now, some of these servos, they actually have a spline on the shaft here. This one doesn't seem to have that. These are more of a compression fit. The splines are kind of nice because you know it's never going to slip. But the problem with the splines is you also can't always center the servo arm where you want it to be. I dropped that one over the side. So I'll just use the other one for now. Okay, so this is going to screw on here. Okay, so we're back again. My camera shut down on me again, so I seem to have a problem with the file size. When it gets around 2 gig, it shuts down. So we were putting the control arms on the servos, and I'm just going to mount these on here. There's no real spline on these, so we're just going to mount them. And try to mount them so the servo is perpendicular to the center line of the plane. Okay. Small screws in. And they're small Phillips head screws. So it's a little hard for my fingers to work with these. Let's put them both on now. Okay. These in. Now, what we gave you is some piano wire. Now this is 40 thou in diameter, and we did a Z-bend on the end of it. Okay, so that fits into the holes on the control arms here. Now some of these holes may be too small. I can't recall if we went through and we drilled them out for you, but if you need to, use a little pin vise and just drill out the holes, okay, to 40 thou for the piano wire. Okay, just drill through it like that. Just open it up a little bit. Okay, and then place your piano wire in the servo arm. Now, for the elevator, I found it was best to go in about the 3rd hole in from the end. Okay, and then just set it down like that. And then we're going to take these little white plastic blocks. Now, we built these on a rapid prototyping machine. We have like a 3D printer here. And there's a hole, sort of an oblong hole on one end, and that's where the piano wire goes through, if you can see that. And then the hole in the other end is actually threaded for the M2 screw. So I'm just going to push the piano wire through this. And the screw goes through the wooden control horn. And you can just tighten it up. And it should hold the piano wire in place. And if you can see the end of this, when you tighten it, you should have your elevator in a horizontal position as best you can. You can always adjust it later, but just get it pretty close. And then we're going to do the same thing for the rudder. Now for the rudder, I found it was okay on the outer arm. If you put it, the further out you put it, the more throw you have on the rudder. So if you find that it's too much for you, you can move it back in and it's a little less sensitive. Okay, but some people like to have a lot of control, especially if they're experienced pilots, or if it's a windy condition outside, you're better off with a bit more control. But if you're just learning, you're probably okay with less throw on some of these control surfaces. So I'm just going to screw this in here. Again, try to get your rudder so it's more or less straight. Okay, so our rudder's fairly straight. I'm just going to move this off a little bit, straighten it up. Okay, so these are connected up. So now the next thing you do, just to do a little check, you can move your rudder like that. You can move your elevator up and down like this. Okay. Now the next thing to do is we're going to connect up our receiver. So this is our receiver, and it's a 6-channel receiver, and the bottom port is for the binding. Okay, so they give you this binding plug for it. So it's just a connector that shorts these two pins out. Alright, so we'll bind it as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect our two servos to this. So the rudder servo is going to go in the top port, which is labeled number 1. Now that's normally for the aileron, so we're going to plug the rudder into the aileron channel. We find for new pilots that's the easiest way to learn. And the brown wire needs to go towards the back of the receiver. Okay, that's the power wire. And then we're going to take the elevator and we're going to plug that into channel number 2. And again, the brown wire should be going towards the back of the receiver. Okay, and we're probably going to mount the receiver somewhere about here. I'm just going to leave it off for now. The next component we're going to put on is this is our electronic speed control. It's got a bunch of wires coming out of it. Now this wire here with the red connector, this is what connects to our battery. Okay, so it's going to connect on our battery. Okay, with this connector here. And then the other connector here, this connects to our receiver. Okay, so I'm just going to plug that into our receiver, and this goes into channel number 3. And in this case, it's a black wire that needs to go in the back. Plug that in there. Make sure everything's seated. And then just double check all your polarities. Make sure we're okay. Okay, now I'm going to put the receiver around to this side here. See the best way to put it is something like this. So I'm going to take these other 3 wires now. These connect up to the motor, to the 3 wires on the motor. Okay, now you don't know the proper orientation yet, so you're going to just put them in any order. Okay, now all that happens is if you have them connected up wrong, the motor will run in reverse. Okay, and then you take off any 2 of them and reverse them, and you can change the direction of the motor. Okay, so I'm just going to take our receiver now. I'm just going to stick it on the side of the plane here. This double-sided tape. I'm just going to stick it on the side of the plane here. Okay. Now, in order to bind this, we need to bind it to our receiver. So this is our receiver here. Okay, the receiver is in the off position. Okay, this is our throttle here. Normally rudder is here. Okay, but we moved rudder over here. So this is the aileron channel. We moved the rudder to the aileron channel. This will be elevator here, up and down. Okay, make sure your throttle is all the way back before you start this process. Okay, so we're going to take our battery and we're going to plug it in. Now, there's no switch on this. We're not putting a switch on this. You just plug or unplug your battery to turn everything on and off. Make sure the throttle is back. We're going to plug our battery in. Now you notice the receiver is blinking, okay, so it's not bound to the transmitter yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in our bind plug, which goes on the top. Okay, the bind plug is in. Okay, now we'll make sure the throttle is back, and we're going to turn on our transmitter. Okay, now right away it's bound. Okay, it's stopped blinking. Okay, so we have a solid green light. So now you can pull out the binding plug. Okay, and I'm just going to depower the receiver. And when you pull on these and disconnect them, make sure you pull on the connector, not the wiring. Okay, if you pull on the wiring and happen to pull it out, you could short out the battery, and sometimes these batteries can get damaged or they'll ignite if you short them out. So make sure you pull on the connector. So now I'm just going to plug it back in and just double check that everything's properly set. Okay, did you notice when it came on there was a musical chime, and then there's 2 beeps. So the musical chime just means it has power on it. The 2 beeps refer to the 2-cell LiPo that we have here, 7.4 volt LiPo, and then the final beep is for the system check. Okay, so it seems like it's okay. So I'm just going to check our servos. So we're going to look at our servos here, and I'm going to move the elevator up and down. Okay, so now what we do with this is when you pull the stick back, the elevator should go up, which is what it's doing. Okay, so that pushes the tail down, moves the nose up. It should go the opposite way. Okay, and then we're going to do our rudder, which is left rudder. So this rudder moves, sorry, that's right rudder, moves to the right, pushes the tail to the left, okay, and steers the plane to the right. And the same thing the other way. Okay, so our controls seem to be okay. If for some reason they're going the wrong way, there's switches down here that you can use to reverse the direction of your servos. Okay. Now the other thing we want to do is check the direction of our motor. Now I don't know if this is in the right direction or not. Just want to make sure your wiring's out of the way. Okay, and we're going to give it a little bit of throttle. So this is the throttle here. Okay, now the throttle is actually, the motor's actually going in the wrong direction. Okay, it's going counterclockwise here. So we're going to actually reverse the wiring to get the motor to spin in the proper direction. Okay, so in order to do that, I want to depower everything, so I'm going to unplug the battery. I don't want to risk shorting out our speed control. And then I'm just going to swap any two of these wires. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing. I just swap these two. And then make sure everything's connected up well. There's no bare metal showing anywhere. Okay. And then we're going to just do one more final test. So we've left our transmitter on. Make sure your transmitter is always on before you plug the battery in and off after you've unplugged the battery. Okay, so the transmitter's still on, throttle's off. Okay, so we've got our plane all set up now. Everything's positioned properly. We secured the speed control, secured our receiver. Okay, now the receiver's mounted upside down. So again, the binding plug is going in the last hole here, which is actually on the top. Now what I'm going to do is just power it up one more time. Turn the transmitter on first. We're going to plug our battery in. Make sure our throttle is back. Plug our battery in. And we get our systems checked. Now we're going to just check the motor. The motor's moving in the proper direction. Our servos are in the proper direction. Okay. Now the one thing you can do is if you found that something's not quite centered right, you can adjust the control horns to move things around. Or you can also adjust it using these little buttons on the side of the transmitter here. So you can actually move your rudder and you can step it back and forth. Now normally you don't do that until you're out on the flying field. You try to center things as best you can mechanically. And then when you get flying your plane, you actually can use these in the air to recenter things so you get the plane flying the way you want it to go. Okay? So just leave these alone for now. It can actually get a bit confusing if you start to play with these ahead of time. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just one final balance of the plane. So I'm going to unplug the battery and I'm going to turn off the transmitter. And I'm going to take, we need to figure out where to position the battery. So I'm just going to take some masking tape and make a little loop with it. And I'm going to stick it on the battery. And I'm going to figure out about where the battery should go. So I'm going to guess it's somewhere about here. Now I'm just going to pick the plane up underneath at the balance point, because I put some mark underneath here. I'm going to put my fingers where the mark was. Just try to figure out where the balance point is. I think I'm on it about right here. So it's a little tail heavy here. Okay, so I'm going to move this forward a bit. And if anything, you want your plane to be a little bit nose heavy. Try not to fly a tail heavy plane. And so that's probably about right where it should be. Now of course my camera shut off on me before, so I had gone ahead and done this. But I hollowed out an area underneath here. So this is where I'm going to put my battery. Okay. So once you've figured out the location for your battery here, just transfer it down below. And we're going to put the battery in there. Now I'm just going to take the tape off. Now when you put the battery in, put it in with the discharge leads on the top. Okay, and just tuck in the balance lead, and then you make sure you have enough room to plug your battery in. Okay, we should have lots of cable there. Now what I found is you need to protect your battery a little bit from any moisture because it's on the bottom here, or any snow or mud if you're flying outside. So what I used to do is just tape it over, but that gets a little cumbersome sometimes to continuously take the tape on and off. So what I do now is I just make a little cardboard hatch, okay, and I used to just tape this on. But then I found every time I peeled it off, it peeled the foam off with the tape. So I found the best thing to do is just to put some tape on the foam ahead of time, okay, and leave that there. So now when you stick this on, you're sticking the tape to the tape, all right? You're not sticking the tape to the foam. So just kind of figure out roughly where this should go and tape it over, and now it's taped onto the tape, and when you peel it off, you just peel off one side, open it up, and your battery's there. Okay, now you may find you need to put a little bit of some vent holes in here or something just to get it to cool the battery. You should check your battery after your first couple of flights, make sure it's not getting warm, because it's really sort of buried in the foam here, right? So make sure it's not getting too hot. I might move that back a bit. Okay, and then you should be good to go. And again, when you get flying, you're probably going to want to put a bigger battery in here. And when you do that, you're probably going to wind up moving the battery opening here a little further back. Okay, don't make it any more nose heavy. Okay, cut the area here a bit further back for a bigger battery. Okay, so that's really about all there is to it. Just do your final balance check on your plane. Just make sure it's okay. So we're balancing okay there. I'm pretty close. I'm a little bit ahead of where it was. Okay, so that's about right. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed our videos, and we'll see you on the field. Take care. Okay, I just want to talk to you now about charging the batteries. The battery I have for this plane is a 360 milliamp hour battery. It's a very small battery for this plane. It could easily handle a battery twice this size or more. Okay, but we wanted to keep everything light, so this is a very small battery. So we've gotten these balancing chargers. Okay, this is a Venom charger, and it's charging 2 or 3 cell batteries. And in this case, it charges the battery through the balance port. Okay, a lot of these chargers, they charge through the discharge connector, and then they bleed voltage off through the balancing leads. Okay, this one doesn't do that, it just charges directly through this lead. Now this plugs into 120 volts. A lot of chargers plug into your 12 volt car battery. Okay, and if you're out on the field, that's actually more convenient than this. But for flying inside in the gym, this is a good solution. So I'm just going to plug this in now. Okay, and when it comes on, you get 3 green lights. Okay. And if you take your battery, now make sure your battery is fairly cool. If you're just taking it out of the plane and it's warm, you should let it cool down first. So you're going to plug this into the connector that's for the 2 cell, which is a smaller connector here. Okay, and it's polarized, you can only put it in one way. And when you plug it in, it automatically switches these 2 lights off, which means now it's charging. Okay, and after about 40 minutes, when it's finished charging, it will all the lights will go green. Okay, but when you're charging this, don't do this unattended. Make sure you're there to observe it. Make sure you check the battery occasionally to make sure it's not getting warm. Okay, and you should also charge this on a non-combustible surface, so don't put it on a pile of paper. Put it on a insulated pad or a cookie sheet or a baking pan or something that won't catch fire. Okay, and then you should stay with it while it's charging. It should take about 40 minutes. Okay, and then all the lights will go green. You can disconnect it, and if it's not too warm, let it cool down a little bit. If it's not too warm, then you can put it in your plane and fly. Okay, so that's all there is for that. And once you get flying and you've got some experience, I suggest you get a bigger battery, 500-600 milliamp battery, and put it in the plane. And you'll have to rebalance it a little bit, maybe move the battery back a little bit, okay, to get it in the correct spot. Okay, so that's everything. I hope you enjoyed our build videos, and our next videos will be of our flight demonstration. Thank you.